The Hawthorne Hotel stood quietly on Franklin Avenue, not the kind of place people sought for its amenities, but the kind they came to when they needed to disappear. From the 14th floor, room 1403 looked out over a city dimmed by early November fog, the kind that blurred lines and softened noise. Graham Whitaker sat by the window, watching the streetlights blink through the haze like distant signals no longer meant for him. He was 50, chief financial officer of one of the country's largest food conglomerates. From the outside, he had it all: wealth, respect, a corner office with a view. But inside, there was a stillness that bordered on hollow, like the very room he sat in, neat, clean, and cold. On the small table, 2 chicken sandwiches sat on white porcelain plates. One had been picked at, the other remained untouched, steam long gone, the bread curling slightly at the corners. It wasn't a mistake. Graham always ordered 2. 3 years had passed since Margaret, his wife of nearly 2 decades, collapsed beside him on a cabin porch in Vermont. A sudden stroke. One moment she was laughing, sipping Cabernet in her white blouse. The next she was crumpling like paper. He never got to say goodbye. Since then, life had been quiet, predictable. Work, home, sleep, repeat. Nothing wrong, nothing alive. He opened the window slightly, letting the cold air spill in like memory. The streets below buzzed faintly, a city moving on without him. Then came the voice, quiet, unexpected. "Excuse me, would you mind if I had that sandwich?" He turned sharply. A young woman stood just outside his room in the hallway, leaning against the wall. Her brown hair was tied in a loose, tired knot. An oversized gray coat hung from her shoulders, and she held a canvas tote so worn it had frayed at the corners. Her eyes weren't pleading. They weren't ashamed. They simply looked tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from one sleepless night, but from too many in a row. Graham didn't speak at first. He walked to the table, picked up the full sandwich, and brought it to the door. She took it gently. "Thank you," she said, nodding once. He could have closed the door. He nearly did. But instead, the words slipped out. "Would you like to come inside? It's cold out." The woman hesitated. Her eyes searched his face. Then, slowly, she nodded. And for the first time in a long while, Graham Whitaker didn't feel quite so alone. She sat quietly in the corner armchair, her fingers wrapped around the sandwich like it was made of something precious. Graham watched her from across the room, not with suspicion, but with a strange, calm curiosity, as if her presence was somehow familiar, though he was certain they had never met. She didn't eat right away. Instead, she tore the sandwich in half, wrapped one piece carefully in a paper napkin, and placed it gently back in her bag. "For later," she said softly, almost as if apologizing for the gesture. He nodded, saying nothing. After a few minutes, she finally took a bite. Her movements were slow, deliberate, not rushed like someone starving, but restrained, as though used to stretching every small thing into enough. "Do you live nearby?" Graham asked, his voice barely above the hum of the vent. She shook her head. "No, not really. Not anywhere, I guess." She glanced down at the floor. The shadows under her eyes looked like they'd been there for years. "I'm staying a few blocks over. Sort of. There's a parking garage near 5th and Carson. They don't patrol much at night." Graham understood without asking. She was living in her car, maybe not even her own. "My name's Graham," he offered, as if it might make the silence less heavy. She looked up and met his eyes, then nodded once. "Rachel," she said. "Just Rachel." A pause hung between them. It wasn't awkward, just quiet, like 2 people standing near the edge of something neither wanted to name. "Why this hotel?" he asked, not accusing, just wondering. Rachel shifted slightly, pulling the coat tighter around her. "There's a back entrance. Warm air blows through the vents by the service hall. I used to walk past here when I cleaned rooms, a while back. Guess I thought if I looked like I belonged, no one would stop me." "You used to work here?" She nodded. "Before I had my son. Before everything changed." The mention of a child struck something in Graham, but he didn't ask. She didn't elaborate. Her fingers moved slowly over the empty sandwich wrapper, smoothing it flat. "I can go," she said after a moment, standing halfway. "No," he said quickly, then more gently. "You're fine. Stay as long as you need." Rachel hesitated, then sat back down. The air between them softened, just slightly. Outside, the city blurred further under the fog. Inside, for the first time in a long time, someone else's presence didn't feel like intrusion. It felt necessary. The room had fallen into a kind of steady quiet, not tense, but watchful. Rachel sat with her hands folded in her lap now, the empty plate pushed to the side table. The way she held herself, shoulders slightly hunched, ankles tucked under the chair, reminded Graham of a bird that had once known how to fly but hadn't spread its wings in a long while. He refilled his glass with water and offered her one. She accepted it with both hands, like warmth mattered more than the drink. "You mentioned a son," Graham said softly, not pressing, just offering space. She nodded slowly. "Eli. He's almost 2. The name hung in the air like something delicate. "Is he with you?" he asked. "In the car," she said quietly. "He's asleep in the back. I parked near the diner across the street. It's safer when there's light. I cracked a window, locked the doors. He sleeps better when I'm not moving around." Graham's chest tightened. She looked up, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. "I know how that sounds," she said, before he could speak. "But I check on him every 15 minutes. I don't sleep much anyway." He said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't either offend her pride or diminish the quiet desperation of her choices. "I had a place," she continued. "A small one. Nothing special. After Eli's father left, things got hard. I took night shifts, cleaning offices. Then Eli got sick. Hospital bills stacked up. My rent went up. I went down." Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was just speaking the facts, as if laying down stones to mark where she had come from. "Eventually," she said, "the choices stopped feeling like choices." Graham sat back. He could feel something moving under the surface of his skin. Not pity, not sorrow, but something older. Recognition, maybe. A memory he hadn't touched in years. "My wife died in Vermont," he said after a long silence. Rachel looked at him, waiting. 3 years ago, stroke, we were on vacation. One minute she was there, talking about how the leaves looked like fire. The next, she was gone. He stared down at the glass in his hand. It trembled just slightly, so he set it down. "Since then, I've worked, sat in boardrooms, answered emails, filled every hour I could with numbers and meetings. But at night, when the noise stopped, I'd sit in silence. And I realized silence is not the same as peace." Rachel didn't speak, but she understood. He could see it in the way her eyes softened, the way her fingers stopped twisting at the hem of her sleeve. "Sometimes," she said, "the quiet is where the ghosts live." He nodded. The room, still lit by a single-floor lamp near the window, felt less cold now. The sandwich was gone, but something else lingered, the feeling that 2 people who had nothing in common just a few hours ago now sat in the same shadow. "I should check on him," Rachel said gently, starting to rise. "I'll come with you," Graham said, the words surprising even himself. She paused, unsure. "It's not far," he added. And with a soft nod, she picked up her bag. Together, they left the room, walking down the hall and into the November night, 2 strangers, side by side, under the same gray sky. They crossed the street without speaking, their footsteps muffled by the mist-softened pavement. The city had quieted, but not in the way cities sleep, more like it was holding its breath. The diner's neon sign flickered above them, casting faint pink light across a row of parked cars. Rachel moved ahead, weaving through until she stopped beside a dusty old Toyota with a dented fender and mismatched doors. She unlocked it quickly and opened the back door. Graham stood a few feet behind her, unsure whether to step closer or not. Inside, Beneath a thin blanket was a small boy curled against a pile of carefully arranged coats and towels. His hair was soft and dark, his cheeks flushed with warmth. He was breathing deeply, a plastic pacifier still tucked into the corner of his mouth. Rachel reached in gently, adjusting the blanket around his tiny shoulders. "He stirs when the air gets too cold," she murmured. "I have to layer the windows with cardboard some nights." Graham stepped closer, slowly. There was something about the way the child's body curled inward, the way his tiny fingers clutched at nothing, that knocked something loose in him, a breath he hadn't taken in years. "He's beautiful," Graham said quietly. Rachel nodded without looking up. "He doesn't know we're struggling. Not yet. He thinks this is all an adventure." She closed the door carefully, as if afraid that even sound might wake him. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," Graham said, more to himself than to her. Rachel looked at him, her face unreadable. "I don't want charity," she said, her voice even. "I've had enough pity to last me." "This isn't pity," Graham replied. "It's something else." A beat passed. Then she nodded once. "I believe you," she said softly. They stood there in the cold, the street lamp flickering above them. Rachel pulled her coat tighter, more from habit than from the chill. "Would you let me help?" he asked. She hesitated. "I can get you a room, just for the night. For him, somewhere warm." She didn't answer right away. She walked back to the car, peered through the fogged window one more time, then turned. "Just one night," she said. "For him, not for me." Graham didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened. It was a beginning not of a solution, but of trust. Back at the hotel, the night manager gave them a second room key without question. Graham paid in cash. Rachel tucked Eli into the bed like she'd done 1,000 times before. Only this time the sheets were clean, the room warm, and the world just for a moment kind. She didn't cry. She didn't thank him. She simply sat in the armchair beside the crib, watching her son breathe. And Graham, from the doorway, watched her. Something about that scene, the quiet, the stillness, the fierce, gentle love in her posture left him standing longer than he meant to. He finally whispered, "Good night." Rachel didn't look up. But as he turned to go, she said, almost too softly to hear, "Thank you for seeing us." He didn't reply, but he felt it deep, slow, and undeniable. He had seen them, and he could no longer look away. The next morning, Graham rose before the sun. The hotel was silent, except for the occasional groan of the elevator cables and the low hum of heating vents waking to life. He didn't knock on Rachel's door. Instead, he left a paper bag at the threshold inside, a thermos of oatmeal, a banana, a folded note that said nothing but the room number in his handwriting, and a small plush fox for Eli. Something Margaret had once bought for a friend's baby. He'd never gotten rid of it. Then he left for the office. That day, meetings passed in a blur. Numbers filled the whiteboards, charts filled the air, but Graham wasn't really there. He kept thinking of the way Eli's chest had risen and fallen in sleep, of the way Rachel's eyes had looked in the doorway, like she had been standing on the edge of asking for help but didn't want to fall. That night, he didn't go straight to his own room. Instead, he knocked gently on hers. Rachel opened the door slowly. Her hair was down, still damp from a shower. Eli was on the bed behind her, crawling between the pillows, cooing to himself. "You didn't have to," she started. "I know," he interrupted. "I wanted to." She nodded once, then stepped aside. He entered quietly. The room smelled like soap and something sweeter, maybe baby lotion. Eli stopped moving when he saw him. He blinked, then broke into a slow, curious grin. "He remembers faces," Rachel said, "even after one night." Graham crouched down a bit, held up a hand. The boy reached out, grabbing his index finger. The grip was small, but it held something powerful, a kind of trust that couldn't be forced or faked. They spent the evening quietly. Rachel fed Eli while Graham sat nearby, listening. They didn't talk much. But when she stepped away to rinse the bottle, Graham gently picked the boy up. Eli didn't cry. He just nestled his head into Graham's shoulder, thumb in his mouth. Rachel returned and stopped in the doorway, seeing them. "That's new," she said. "What is?" "He doesn't usually let anyone else hold him." Graham didn't move. Didn't want to. The moment was simple. But something inside him, something that had been dormant for years, stirred with a weight he didn't expect. When it was time to go, Rachel followed him to the door. "Are you sure this is okay?" she asked. "All of this?" "I don't know what it is," he admitted, "but it doesn't feel wrong." She nodded slowly. Then, as he stepped into the hallway, she added, "He slept through the night for the first time in weeks." Graham paused. "Then maybe we're doing something right," he said. She closed the door gently. He stood in the hallway a moment longer, staring at the floor. He hadn't meant to care, but he did. Part 6. Light through the window. It began with a photograph. Blurry. Taken from across the street by someone walking out of the diner. Graham, holding Eli in the hotel lobby. Rachel beside them. Eli's tiny hand grasping the edge of Graham's jacket. Just a moment, unguarded, ordinary, and real. By the next afternoon, the photo was everywhere. Tech CFO seen holding baby in hotel. Who is the woman beside him? The headline spun out faster than either of them could react. Graham found out from his assistant, who had seen it on a gossip site over lunch. Rachel found out the harder way through the cold stares of hotel staff who suddenly forgot how to smile. By the time Graham returned to the hotel, Rachel had already packed her bag. She opened the door before he could knock. "I can't stay here," she said. Graham stepped inside anyway. Eli sat on the bed beside her, fussing quietly as she zipped the last compartment. "I'll explain," he said. "It's a mistake. They don't know the story." "They never care about the story," Rachel said softly. "They just fill in the blanks with what hurts the most." She picked up Eli and held him against her shoulder. The boy had grown used to hotel sheets, soft towels, silence at night. But none of that mattered now. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Graham said. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm leaving before it gets worse." He stood there, unsure what to offer. "I can find another place. Discreet. Safe." Rachel shook her head. "This isn't about hiding. It's about him. I don't want my son growing up with whispers at his back." She was holding herself carefully now, not out of pride, but out of weariness, the kind that settles in when hope starts to feel like a liability. "He deserves peace," she added. "Not headlines." Graham exhaled slowly. "Let me talk." "Talk to who?" she asked. "The internet?" "No. To them. All of them." Rachel didn't answer. She just looked down at her son, who had drifted to sleep on her shoulder. That night, Graham stood in a quiet studio, under soft lights, with no teleprompter. He spoke of Margaret, of the years that had hollowed him out, of the silence that success could never drown. Then he spoke of Rachel. "She didn't ask for help," he said. "She didn't take advantage. She didn't beg. She fed her child with the kind of strength I had forgotten existed. And somehow, that cracked something open in me, something I thought had died." He looked into the camera. "I did not save her. I did not rescue her. If anything, she saved me from a life where nothing moved, nothing mattered." By morning, the tides had changed. Messages poured in not from critics, but from parents, nurses, people who had known the same quiet desperation. People who saw not scandal, but humanity. At noon, Rachel knocked on his door. Eli was bundled in her arms, eyes wide and curious. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "Neither do I," Graham replied. "But if the offer's still there, we'd like to stay." He stepped back. The door opened again. Not just into a room, but into something new. The letter came 2 weeks later, folded neatly, no return address. The handwriting was familiar neat, slanted slightly to the right, pressed hard enough into the paper that the lines showed through the back. Rachel read it once, then again, She didn't cry, but her hands didn't stop shaking for several minutes. She left it on the kitchen table of the small apartment Graham had rented, a modest space with soft lighting and a view of the river, quiet enough for Eli to nap in peace. When Graham arrived that evening, he saw the envelope before he saw her. She wrote, Rachel said, her voice flat. My mother. He sat across from her, waited. No apology, she continued. No asking to explain. Just one line. She slid the letter across the table. If there's still a chance to know my grandson, I would like to try. Graham read it twice, then looked up. You don't owe her anything, he said gently. I know, Rachel said. But he deserves to know where he comes from, even if where he comes from is broken. Graham didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, he said, let him decide one day, with the full story, not just the pain. 3 days later, they drove to the edge of a town Rachel hadn't seen in nearly 3 years. It was the kind of place where everyone still waved at the passing mail truck. The houses had chipped paint and porches that creaked in the wind, familiar in a way that pressed against her chest. Her parents' home stood at the end of a narrow drive. The siding was a little more worn, the garden beds overgrown. Rachel stood at the edge of the walkway, Eli in her arms, his fingers curled around the strap of her coat. Graham stood just behind her, not close enough to lead, not far enough to disappear. The door opened slowly. Her mother stepped out. She looked smaller than Rachel remembered. Older, softer. Her hands were folded, her eyes cautious. Then she saw the child. She stepped forward, slow, uncertain. I wasn't strong, she said, her voice catching. I was scared. I thought people would talk. And I thought, if I pushed you away, it would protect you. Rachel said nothing. Her father appeared next, standing behind her mother like a shadow, quieter, unsure. Then Eli reached out his hand, just barely. And everything shifted. Rachel's mother let out a broken breath. Her arms lifted. May I hold him? Rachel hesitated. Then, slowly, she placed Eli in her mother's arms. The older woman held him as if holding time itself. She didn't speak, just wept softly, her lips moving in quiet fragments of prayer and apology. Rachel stood beside her, unmoving, until Graham stepped forward and placed a hand gently at her back. No words passed between them. None were needed. Later, they sat in the same kitchen where Rachel had once eaten cereal before school. Her mother poured tea. Her father bounced Eli carefully on his knee. Laughter returned, cautious, unsure, but real. Across the room, Rachel caught Graham's eye. He gave her a quiet smile. She mouthed 2 words. Thank you. He didn't answer aloud, but in his mind, he whispered back, thank you for going home. It was a spring afternoon, the kind where the sky looked washed clean and the breeze carried the scent of something alive. They returned to the park across from the diner, the same place where, nearly a year ago, Rachel had parked an old car under a street lamp and whispered lullabies into the dark. This time, they didn't arrive in silence. Eli laughed as he stumbled through the grass, his legs stronger now, surer. He wore a navy vest and a crooked bow tie, his hair still tousled from a morning nap. Graham knelt near the old oak tree, smoothing out a linen cloth someone had spread beneath a wooden arch wrapped in ivy. He wasn't in a tailored suit. Just a soft gray blazer, the same one Rachel had once said made him look less like a man with a fortress and more like someone who belonged in the world. Rachel stood barefoot in the grass a few yards away, holding a single white flower in one hand. Her dress wasn't fancy, just simple cotton that moved gently with the wind. But there was a glow to her now, not from makeup, not from ceremony, but from living. No cameras, no crowd, just a few people who mattered. A quiet space under an open sky. As the wind brushed through the leaves, Eli toddled toward Graham with something clutched in both hands, a small velvet box. He wobbled, paused, then giggled as he dropped it into Graham's palm. Graham took the box and looked up. Rachel was already walking toward him, her steps unhurried, her eyes steady. He dropped to one knee, not grandly, not for spectacle, but simply. "You never asked for anything," he said, voice low and certain. "You didn't beg. You didn't expect. You just showed up on the worst night of your life and gave me the chance to feel again." He opened the box. Inside was a ring simple, elegant, chosen not for price but for how it would look wrapped around the hand that had held Eli, folded clothes, and fed a child in the cold. "You didn't take my leftovers, Rachel," he said. "You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. You gave me a reason. You gave me family. You gave me love." He swallowed once. "Will you marry me?" Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. She didn't cry right away. She laughed softly, disbelieving, then dropped to her knees in front of him. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." They held each other, their arms fitting like they had always known how, a quiet circle around the child who had brought them here. The minister, a friend of Graham's sister, kept it short, just enough to mark the moment. Eli played with flower petals at their feet, but when Graham spoke his final vow not just to Rachel, but to the boy, Eli wandered back and wrapped himself around Graham's leg. "Daddy," he said, and the park went still. Graham bent and lifted him easily, holding him in one arm, Rachel in the other. "I love you, son," he whispered into the boy's ear. In that moment, under an open sky, with no spotlight but the sun, the last of the silence inside him broke. And something new, something whole, took its place. They didn't move into a mansion. Graham found a small house with a porch that creaked in the mornings and windows that faced the sunrise, a place with chipped paint and stubborn plumbing, a place Rachel could make her own. It wasn't loud, it wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. Eli learned to run across the floorboards in socks too big for him. He dragged blankets from room to room, claimed every chair as a fort. His laughter filled the kitchen, spilled down the hallway, echoed up the stairs. Rachel hung sketches on the fridge, not hers, but Eli's. She planted herbs in the windowsill, lined books along a low shelf. She slept with the window cracked, not to hear the city, but to feel the breeze, and know they were no longer hiding. Graham still went to work. He still wore suits, but he came home early now. He stopped checking emails at dinner. He learned to burn grilled cheese just slightly, the way Eli liked it, and how to carry a child half asleep without waking him. Some nights, after the dishes were done and Eli had fallen asleep with a toy train in his hand, Graham and Rachel sat on the porch in silence. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. But there was no pressure to fill the space. It was already full. Rachel never asked for promises. She didn't want declarations. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was to be allowed to exhale. And slowly, Graham gave her that. Not through gifts, but presence. They still got looks sometimes. Strangers on sidewalks trying to do the math. Whispers when someone recognized Graham from a magazine profile or a business segment. But those whispers faded. They always did. What remained was the life they built, not from obligation, not from rescue, but from the simple, impossible truth that two broken people had somehow fit together in a world that didn't make room for either of them alone. Eli started preschool the following spring. On his first day, Graham knelt and buttoned his tiny coat, kissed his forehead. Rachel stood behind them, smiling with tired eyes. As they walked back to the car, she slipped her hand into Graham's. He didn't speak, he just held it tighter. Because there were no miracles, no fairy tale endings, only choices. One quiet act of kindness, one night in a hallway, one plate of untouched food. And from that, a family.